What's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at the all-new Chuwi Core Box 4. Now on the channel we've taken a look at a couple different generations of the Core Box, and obviously the internals start to get much better. The exterior has pretty much stayed the same, and I'm actually a big fan of it. I've always liked the way these look. It is super tiny, but it does look like a full-fledged desktop. Now it will sit vertically or horizontally. And taking a look at the front, you can see that this is a very minimalistic design. All we've got really going on here is the power button and an LED indicator. All the magic really happens around back. We've got a dedicated headphone and a dedicated microphone jack. We've also got Thunderbolt 4 on this unit. One of the cool things about this is, yes, we can actually use this to connect to an eGPU, and we will test that by the end of the video. But this can also be powered over that Thunderbolt 4, otherwise known as USB 4 port. A 65 watt PD power supply will be more than enough to power this up, but we've also got a barrel jack, and this does come with a 65 watt power supply that we can plug directly into that barrel jack. It also has gigabit Ethernet, full-size HDMI 2.0, a full-size DisplayPort, and 4 USB 3.0 ports around back here. When it comes to upgrading this unit, basically all we can do here is add storage. We've got one M.2 SSD, we can always swap this out, but it also supports two 2.5-inch SSDs, and it comes with all of the cabling we need. Now the RAM here is soldered, but it's using LPDDR5, and this just happens to be running one of my favorite CPUs for emulation, the Intel i3-1215U. We've got 6 cores, 8 threads, a base clock of 3.3 GHz, and a turbo up to 4.4. In the past, on the channel, we've tested a laptop with this same CPU, and this will actually even emulate Switch at about 18 to 20 watts. It's actually a really good performer here. And with that i3-1215U, we get Intel UHD graphics with 64 execution units. Now the unit we're going to be testing in this video only has 8 GB of LPDDR5 RAM running at 4800 MHz. For everyday normal use and even emulation, that's plenty, but they're also offering a 16 GB model. And if you do end up picking one of these up, I would definitely opt for more RAM there. You can also get this with up to a 1 TB M.2 SSD, but you can always swap that out later on down the road. It does support two 2.5-inch SSDs. We can mount them right inside of the body. It's got built-in Wi-Fi 6, and this is running Windows 11 right out of the box. So I've had a chance to spend a few days with this machine, and it's actually really snappy. Like I mentioned, we have tested this i3-1215U in the past, and for everyday normal use, web browsing, email checking, video playback, this will even do up to 8K video playback if you have a monitor that will support it, and it's going to handle all of that just fine. Now when it comes to the TDP on this, it's kind of locked down. Usually I can do some adjustment with a third-party app, but unfortunately the way this is set up, we're at about 25 watts with a 32 boost when that GPU kicks in, which is definitely enough for this, but I don't notice the clocks going up as high as they really should be, given that we do have a boost up to 4.4. But I haven't noticed any kind of slowdown when using this as a normal PC, and of course in this video we will be testing some gaming on the internal iGPU. I'm also going to go over some emulation, and by the end we're going to connect an external GPU over Thunderbolt 4 to see, what kind of performance we can really get out of this. And the first thing I wanted to take a look at here was some 4K video playback from YouTube. We'll just make sure we're at 4K 60. I've got Stats for Nerds on, and through everything that I've tested, I only get a couple drop frames up front. Like with this one, for instance, we have 2 drop frames all the way through the video. And I've always had really good luck with these little Intel chips here and 4K video playback. Even some of the lower end Celeron chips do 4K really well. So going into this with the i3-1215U, I had a feeling that I was going to handle it just fine. So, video playback on something like this using your favorite streaming app, YouTube, Plex, is going to work out great. The next thing I wanted to do was show off a few benchmarks that I ran on this PC, and first up we've got Geekbench 5, single core 1464, multi 4842. When it comes to that single core score, this is really great for a lower end chip like this, and that's really one of the big reasons we get amazing emulation performance out of this chip. Moving over to some GPU benchmarks, and first up we've got 3D Mark Wildlife. This is a Vulkan benchmark. Total score here 7,404. Next up we've got Night Raid, 11,690, and finally Firestrike with the 2,949. These iGPU benchmarks aren't really anything to write home about, and you kind of got to expect that. Remember, something like the Iris Xe comes in with about 80 to 90 execution units. With this, it's cut down to 64. But that's not going to stop me from testing a few PC games on this iGPU. And first up, we've got Skyrim. This is the original Skyrim, one of my favorite games. Low, 1080p, and yeah, I mean, we could definitely run these older games over 60 FPS. Now, this is just locked down, but if you wanted to do the older Source Engine stuff from Valve, like Half-Life 2, Portal, Left 4 Dead, you could run those at 1080p high, no problem. So I wanted to test something a little newer, and we've got Forza Horizon 5. Now, I actually didn't expect to get this kind of performance out of it. It's not stellar by any means. We're at 720p low settings, but we are getting over 30 FPS. In fact, by the end of this run, I had an average of 42 FPS, which really isn't that bad for an iGPU like this. And remember, with a game like this, we can actually go right into the settings and lock it at 30 FPS. And if you take a look at Afterburner up in the top left-hand corner, we're pulling around 25 watts in total from this CPU. Now it's time to move over to some emulation, and first on the list we've got PS2 using PCSX2, Gran Turismo 4, DirectX 11 backend, 720p. Now this is one of those games you do have to take it down to 720p given the iGPU performance, kind of just like God of War, we'd have to do the same thing, but there are a ton of PS2 games we could run at 1080p on this system. Believe it or not, this little i3 will actually handle PS3 emulation. We're using RPCS3 at 720p with the Vulkan backend. This is Tekken 6, and this is an easier one to emulate, along with something like Ninja Gaiden or Demon's Souls. So right there at about 20 watts, yeah, this thing's going to run these PS3 games. But when we take it up to the harder to emulate stuff, we need a little more power, and unfortunately the way they have this set up, we just can't feed it enough. So I know for a fact that this game will run at full speed on this chip, at about 25 to 28 watts depending on the area you're in. And this is one of those games that loves those extra cores and threads. We're definitely using all 6 cores and 8 threads, and when this CPU is pegged out the way they have it set up, we can only hit a max clock of 2.9 gigahertz. And the final one I wanted to test out was YUZU for Switch, and I usually blur this out for reasons. I've got Afterburner listed up top. We're pulling 19 watts right now, docked mode, Vulkan backend, and it's doing a great job emulating this game. Now we do see some fluctuations here and there, and those are shaders caching in the background, but overall this little chip at those higher TDPs will handle Switch emulation. So this little PC with the iGPU does a great job with the emulation, and yeah, there are some PC games we can run on this, but we can get a lot more out of this because we've got Thunderbolt 4. What I've got here is a Thunderbolt 3 dock. It's actually a water-cooled 2080 Ti from Aorus. All I need to do is plug it in. I'm going to wait a few seconds for everything to initialize. And with it set up like this, the video signal is coming out of the RTX 2080 Ti to the monitor. So now instead of using the internal iGPU, we've got a pretty beefy GPU we can work with here. Give you a closer look. As you can see, got that i3 1215U. We've still got access to the built-in UHD graphics, but instead of using that, we've got an RTX 2080 Ti with 11 gigabytes of VRAM. And now, just going back to Forza Horizon 5, instead of running this at an average of around 42 FPS, 720p low, we're at Ultra 1080p with that RTX 2080 Ti. We can get an average of around 92 FPS. Now, I do see some fluctuations going down under 90, and it really comes down to the CPU performance here. But overall, yeah, I mean, we're getting way better performance than we did with the internal iGPU. So overall, I've been really enjoying this little PC. Personally, I love this little chip for emulation, and the fact that we've got Thunderbolt 4 here does add a little extra to it if you have access to an eGPU. And of course, an RTX 2080 Ti is way overkill for this chip. I would personally go with something like a GTX 1650, or one of my favorites, just an RTX 3060. It seems to work well with a lot of the systems that I've tested over Thunderbolt 3, Thunderbolt 4, or even USB 4. Now these are going to be up for sale on Amazon and Chuwi's website. I'll leave some links in the description, but if there's anything else you want to see running on this, just let me know in the comments below. I wouldn't mind doing a full emulation video on this, and I'm actually trying to figure out a way we can up that TDP. I'd actually like to take this up to 28 watts, full time, just to see what we could really get out of it. And I know we'd get a nice bump in performance across the board like that. But that's going to wrap it up for this video. Let me know what you thought about this little thing in the comments below. And like always, thanks for watching.